Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Connection Series webinar here at Mountain States Policy Center. I'm Chris Cargill. I'm the president of Mountain States Policy Center and appreciate you being here. We have a great conversation this morning with Scott Moses, who we'll get to in just a couple of minutes. We're going to let the attendee room fill up here with all of our participants who are joining us from all across the Mountain States. You know, we have some folks from Washington, from Idaho, Montana, Oregon. So to everyone who's joining us, thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it. Mountain States Policy Center is a free market think tank that's based in Idaho, but we also cover policy issues in Eastern Washington, in Montana, and in Wyoming as well. Our focus is on free markets and on trying to make sure that we are doing whatever possible to improve the lives of citizens, and we do that via the free market. And hopefully you've seen our website. Hopefully you've been to our website at mountainstatespolicy.org, seen some of our research work. Tomorrow we'll be having a discussion on our policy manual, which is our 200 pages of what I say is very light reading, where you can get a sense of all the different policy issues that are facing the region here in the Mountain States. Today at our Connection Series, which is our inaugural Connection Series, by the way, we have the chance to talk to a very special guest, and that is Scott Moses. Scott Moses is a partner, head of grocery, pharmacy, and restaurants, investment banking practice at Solomon Partners, and a member of the firm's operating committee. He specializes in retail sector strategic and financial advice with a focus on mergers, acquisitions, sales, divestitures, of traditional and specialty food and drug retailers and restaurants. He joined that firm in 2016. Now, that may sound really complicated, but the best way I found to explain what Scott Moses does is he's an expert on mergers and acquisitions and what we're going to talk about today, and that is the merger of Albertsons and Kroger. By the way, if you have questions or comments, put them into the chat, or you can send an email, whatever's easiest for you, and we will get to your comments and questions throughout the day. We'll have Scott turn on his video now so he can join us and join the rest of you. Scott, good morning to you. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Chris.
You know, before we turn it over to Scott for his presentation and to take questions, I want to just say that while Scott's the head of Solomon Partners, the grocery, pharmacy, and restaurants investment banking practice, he was hired by Albertsons as a third party to do research on this particular merger. So he's not going to speak on behalf of the company. He's going to speak on what he knows in terms of all of those different facets of mergers, divestitures, all those different things that go along with a merger this size and this complex. So now that we have that out of the way, Scott, fire away. We'd love to hear what you have to say, and hopefully our guests can also put in some questions for us throughout the day. Looks like you just went muted there, Scott.
All right. So
Perfect.
Good morning, everybody. And I hope everyone can see my screen, Chris.
Okay. Yep.
Excellent. So I'm going to walk through a brief update on American grocery, market changes on the West Coast, some background on the transaction, and particularly some facts about CNS, the divestiture buyer, which I know is very important. But first, I thought I'd get right to the heart of the matter. There are 4 reasons why this transaction is good for the country. Number 1, the grocery market in 2024 is far more diverse, far more competitive than the gerrymandered supermarkets only 1980s grocery market described by the FTC and by Attorney General Ferguson. Look, we all know the facts here. We all shop at 5 or 6 grocers regularly. Just ask your friends, your families, your colleagues. They all likely shop at Walmart, Target, Costco, Amazon, or Whole Foods, Aldi, or Trader Joe's, Dollar General, or Family Dollar. In Washington, folks shop at Sprouts, or Grocery Outlet, or Winco, or H Mart, or Metropolitan Market. In Oregon, New Seasons. So saying that Costco, Whole Foods, Amazon, Trader Joe's are not grocers that compete with supermarket grocers is just not a defensible argument in 2024. And I will tell you that my friends who operate those companies are shocked to hear that they no longer compete with supermarket grocers for customers, because that obviously they do every day and have since they started. Number two, Kroger will lower prices for customers and improve wages for teammates. Kroger's got an exceptional 20-year track record of better prices and better wages, both company-wide and with acquisitions. Kroger has made some extraordinary public commitments to invest billions of dollars to lower prices, to increase wages, to improve stores when the transaction closes. Number three, the grocery labor market is very fluid. It is not a rigid, monolithic group of unionized supermarket workers that can only work in supermarkets. To the contrary, most grocery jobs today are at non-union grocers, not unionized supermarket grocers like Kroger and Albertsons. And supermarkets compete every day for labor with thousands of companies offering millions of jobs. And number four, C&S is an excellent divestiture buyer. They are one of the largest, strongest, most accomplished grocery companies in the United States. It's a $20+ billion family business with a 100-year track record of success. So with that introduction, let's talk a bit about grocery in 2024. The key point is grocery does not equal supermarkets. That was the 1980s. Grocery today equals super centers, plus club grocers, plus discount dollar and drug grocers, plus specialty, ethnic, and online grocers. And yes, supermarket grocers as well. They are all grocers. Now, for many years, I've been sounding the alarm about the rise of what I call the national discount grocers: Walmart, Target, Costco, Amazon, Aldi, Dollar General, and Family Dollar, and the existential threat that they pose to supermarket grocers. Now, this is not theory. We have all seen this happen with department stores, which have been marginalized over the last 20 years by some of the same forces. So the transformation of the US grocery market. 20 years ago, supermarket grocers comprised 10 of the top 15 US grocers. And look at who's not on the list: Amazon, Whole Foods, Aldi, Trader Joe's, and others. Today, supermarket grocers are only 5 of the top 15 US grocers. The national discount grocers during that time period added 39,000 grocery stores on the left side of this page. They've got over 70,000 today. And there are less than 26,000 supermarkets left, and that number is falling all the time. In the center, you can see that the average consumer in 2024 regularly shops at 5 grocers, not just one supermarket. And then on the right, online grocery is up 4 times in 4 years, literally quadrupled, led not by supermarkets, but by Walmart, Target, Costco, and Amazon. And those guys all have exceptional credit ratings, which means they have a very low cost of debt, which gives them nearly unlimited capacity to invest because they borrow cheaper than most countries. Then there's Instacart. So Instacart expanded grocery choice in an exponential way. They literally reach 95% of North American consumers from anywhere. I mean, literally any of you right now could be on Instacart looking at a page like this in Seattle or Portland or anywhere around the country where there are dozens of different options on their marketplace where you can price check, fill your basket. You can also be checking Walmart.com or Amazon, Whole Foods, or Target, and you don't even have to leave your sofa. Whereas just a few years ago, in order to price check anywhere, you needed to get in your car and drive around to all these different places. But the grocery market is fundamentally different today than it ever was before. And as a consequence, there is more grocery choice, more convenience, more competition, and more price transparency than we have ever seen in grocery history. That's not a hyperbolic exaggeration. That is a very clear, indisputable fact. 20 years ago, supermarket grocers, shown here in blue, were the primary shop for 79% of Americans. It's now only 38%. In the past 20 years, Walmart, Target, Costco, Amazon, Dollar General, and Aldi collectively increased their US grocery market share by over 30%. Conversely, Kroger, Albertsons, Ahold, which are unionized, shown here in blue, they've lost over 10% share. And supermarket grocers are now down to roughly 1/3 of American grocery, from over 80% in the 1980s. But that time has long since passed, right? That's the disconnect here. Suggesting in 2024 that supermarket grocers are the only place to shop for groceries is just demonstrably false. The national discount guys have 2/3 market share. And again, it is just shocking to other grocers who compete with supermarkets to learn that the FTC thinks that they're not competitors, because they're obviously competing every day for those customers. So what are the consequences of all this on supermarket grocers? Why is Kroger-Albertsons so urgent? Well, unionized grocers' share of grocery jobs is down radically because the non-union operators have added about 2.5 million jobs. And supermarket grocers' profit margins are down considerably over time. And that's the department store parallel. I mean, really, does anybody here shop at JCPenney or Gottschalk's anymore? And that's what we're trying to prevent here for supermarkets. We're trying to help them stay in business. So how did all this happen? Well, it all starts with Walmart. Walmart is the world's #1 grocer, America's #1 grocer by a very, very wide margin. $324 billion in US grocery sales, 30% market share, all on its own, nearly as much share as all supermarket grocers combined. Walmart's US grocery business is actually 3 times the size of Kroger's, 3 times Costco, 5 times Albertsons, 5 times Amazon. It's twice as big as Kroger and Albertsons will be combined. And if you look at the top right of this page, you'll see that Walmart's US grocery share is roughly as big as the next 4 grocers in the United States: Costco, Kroger, Amazon, and Albertsons combined. Walmart's stores, their online fulfillment capacity, are ubiquitous. So Walmart dominates US grocery to an extent that most people just don't appreciate. And that even includes people in the industry. Until you actually get the dashboard and do the math and see this, people know that they've been getting beaten up by Walmart for years, but they didn't know just how far ahead Walmart is than everyone else. This chart shows you. Costco, the world's #2 grocer, so well more than Kroger. #3 in the US, over $100 billion in US grocery. They are #2 on the West Coast. Obviously, Walmart is #1. Most Costco sales are groceries. 40% of US households are members of Costco. And Costco stores generate 5 times the grocery sales of the average supermarket. Then there are the dollar grocers, and they are undeniably grocers. The vast majority of their sales are groceries. Dollar General and Dollar Tree together have a $50 billion US grocery business, 36,000 grocery stores, and they added 23,000 in the last 20 years. Dollar General alone added over 2,800 stores in the last 3 years. That is more stores than Kroger has. Then there's Aldi from Germany, the world's #4 grocer, #2 in Europe. They've got over 13,000 global stores, including 2,800 in the US. Again, that's more than Kroger has. They're owned by Germany's Albrecht family, which is the 11th wealthiest family in the world. They also own Trader Joe's. A lot of people don't know that. Their US grocery sales are up 10 times in the last 20 years to about $30 billion. And they want to be the leading grocer in the United States. Their CEO, Jason Hart, just said so on ABC News. And he said that 25% of US consumers now shop at Aldi. That is twice what it was just 6 years ago. And they are headed up to Washington. Amazon, worth about $2 trillion, valued more than all public US grocers combined by a lot. Now, Amazon has had the same epiphany as Walmart, which is if you want to be the world's #1 retailer, you've got to be the #1 grocer. Today, Amazon is the #5 grocer globally and in the US. But their CEO, Andy Jassy, concedes readily that they haven't quite figured out grocery yet. Now, given their financial capacity, given their very clear commitment, that kind of begs one simple question, right? Which is what happens when Amazon actually figures out grocery, given they're already #5 in the country. Some analysts think that Amazon will be as big a grocer as Walmart in 10 years. And if that happens, just mathematically, supermarkets will necessarily look like department stores, disintermediated and marginalized away. So when you add all this up, what does it mean? In global grocery sales, Walmart is in the stratosphere, $400 billion. Kroger is ranked just number 6 among US grocers. Albertsons is number 8. And by global stores, Kroger and Albertsons are just 9th and 10th, respectively. Let's look at West Coast grocery. So, as I'm sure you all know, because I'm sure you all shop there are dozens and dozens of exceptional grocery competitors on the West Coast. The idea that it's just Kroger and Albertsons fighting it out themselves is ridiculous. In the last 10 years, the national discount grocers have added 1,600 stores. Grocery Outlet, Walmart, Target, Winco, the Dollar Guys, Aldi, Trader Joe's. Walmart is the number 1 grocer on the right side of this page. Costco is number 2. That is, to be fair, a big shift from 10 years ago when Kroger and Albertsons were number 1 and 2. But that was a long time ago. That is not the grocery market in 2024. And to get more granular, Walmart's market share is up 9%. Costco and Amazon together are up 5%. And in some, the national discount grocers are up 18%. Kroger and Albertsons lost 12% share. And then from a labor perspective, the non-union grocers have added nearly 20% share, roughly 2/3 now. They're far larger than the unionized grocers. So with that backdrop, as if it wasn't kind of clear, why is this transaction important? Why is it good for customers, for employees, for communities? Well, you can't be any more clear than this. Kroger-Albertsons will lower prices. Kroger-Albertsons will strengthen and protect union jobs. Why is that credible? Well, Kroger's 20-year track record is crystal clear, not a flash in the pan, an extended, sustained period of time. They've invested $5 billion in better prices. They've consistently improved prices at companies they've acquired. $130 million in lower prices at Harris Teeter, $110 million in better prices at Roundy's. They've reduced gross profit margin by 500 basis points. That's 5%, an extraordinary amount, while Amazon, Walmart, Ahold, and Dollar General have all increased. Kroger has added 110,000 union jobs, while unionized grocery jobs have declined precipitously. So what is Kroger promising? These are their crystal clear commitments. Hundreds of millions of dollars in better prices day one. No store closures, no frontline job losses, period, full stop. They're assuming all of the collective bargaining agreements, and those incidentally have got industry-leading healthcare and pension benefits. Kroger is going to invest $1 billion in better wages, $1.3 billion in better stores, which strengthens the jobs in those stores. They're going to continue their $21,000 tuition reimbursement program, which is wonderful. And this one is really important to me, to combat food insecurity, they're donating 10 billion meals. That is enough to feed every person in Boston, Chicago, Denver, and Seattle every meal, every day for nearly 2 years. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about grocery labor. I personally have been a staunch public supporter of grocery workers, indispensable all the time, but in particular in the various crises we've all experienced around the country, foremost among them, COVID. Here are 2 articles I wrote during COVID, well before this transaction, about the importance of our essential grocery workers around the country. But let's focus on labor facts. Supermarket grocers compete for employees with thousands of companies offering millions of jobs. Non-union grocers, which comprise most grocery jobs today, gig workers like DoorDash, Instacart, and Uber, restaurants, hotels, non-food retail like Gap, Home Depot, Ulta, Foot Locker. And remember, union employees at larger, stronger grocers usually get better wages and better benefits than at smaller, weaker grocers that can't afford those better wages and benefits. And let's be candid, the FTC's mandate is to protect consumers. All things being equal, higher costs mean higher prices for consumers at the checkout line. You can't have it both ways if you want supermarket grocers to continue to serve our communities in the long run. Again, think about what Walmart, Costco, and Amazon have done to department stores. That's the logical extension of what happens here if we make it impossible for supermarket grocers to continue to operate. Finally, let's talk about C&S. So for context, Kroger and Albertsons have pretty complementary footprints. Albertsons in orange is mostly in the Northeast, the mountains, and the West Coast. Kroger in blue is mostly in the Midwest, the Southeast, with some presence in the Western states. Now, C&S is buying 579 stores that are being divested to make sure they maintain strong competition. And those are mostly in Western states. Here is C&S's current footprint in green and the acquisition in violet, so pretty complementary. And remember, C&S supplies over 7,500 grocery stores with dozens of distribution centers all across the country, and they're shown here in red. C&S is going to have a really strong position in some of the largest grocery markets in the United States. It is not some hodgepodge group of stores that the FTC, and that's their word, hodgepodge, that the FTC would have you believe. Not at all. Now, why is C&S such a strong buyer? Again, let's go through the facts. It's a $20+ billion grocery business. It's one of the largest private companies in the US. Family owned, not private equity. 100 years of operating track record as a leading grocery merchant. Well-capitalized buyer. Extensive infrastructure across the country. Strong balance sheet to support customers, to support jobs, to support store investments. Of course, that's how you compete in retail. They have an exceptional management team, and I've known them for a couple of decades. They have extensive acquisition and integration experience. They're spending nearly $3 billion to expand their retail footprint. It is a critical evolution of their long-term strategy. And this is really important to improve on some prior divestitures. They're either buying or licensing local banners to maintain customer continuity, to maintain loyalty and performance. Now, C&S was actually validated by the FTC as a divestiture buyer just nearly 3 years ago in a merger in New York State. And perhaps most important, C&S is assuming the collective bargaining agreements. Remember, these stores could have been sold to a non-union buyer. They could have been sold to an anti-union grocer like Amazon. And that's probably why Local 555, which represents some 18,000 members in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Wyoming, made this point when they endorsed the C&S acquisition. C&S is actually very much like a company called Spartan Nash. It's another multi-billion-dollar grocer. It's based in the Midwest. It supplies over 2,000 grocery stores, and it also operates over 100 stores, but under 10 different banners across 9 states. And just look at what their CEO, Tony Sarsam, said to investors recently. And I'll read this to get it right. Retail and wholesale are really and truly complementary businesses. We learn things in the retail space that we can share with our customers. It gives us a competitive advantage as we share those ideas and those learnings with them. Retail is not a hobby. It's a big business that we've scaled, actually invested in. So compared to other wholesale, we think this gives us a really, really interesting advantage. C&S is going to be the number 8 US grocer in total sales, meaning both retail and wholesale, just behind Publix, but ahead of H-E-B and another major US grocery supplier, UNFI. They'll be 5 times as large as Spartan Nash, which is all the way on the right. They'll be the 11th largest retail grocer by sales and number 10 by stores. They'll have more stores than Costco, Amazon and Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Grocery Outlet, or Sprouts, and a bunch of other guys like H-E-B, Hy-Vee, Meijer, and Giant Eagle. C&S is clearly one of the strongest grocery divestiture buyers we've ever had in the United States. So I'm going to finish where I started. Grocery does not equal supermarkets. And when you do the math and you add up these grocery facts, the implications are very clear. Supermarket grocers are a shrinking part of a much larger grocery landscape. There's more grocery choice, convenience, competition, and price transparency than ever before. Just like department stores before them, supermarkets are under siege from the national discount operators like Walmart and Costco and Amazon. And millions of jobs, especially union jobs, are at risk. And that is why this transaction is so important. So this material is all available on the Kroger-Albertsons website. I'll also get with Chris and make sure that we send this around for everybody, so you can go through it, because it's a little bit more concise than the one on the website. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that people might have.
Well, thanks very much, Scott. Yeah, some of these graphics are just terrific graphics. I especially like the map, Scott, that you showed that has the Albertsons and Kroger locations. I think it's important. One of the first questions I always get asked on this specific topic is, who is Kroger? Especially in our neck of the woods. A lot of people don't know who Kroger is, what they own. Fred Meyer is obviously owned by Kroger. You mentioned a few others as well, but yes, this particular graphic, I think it's important, as you point out, to show how much this basically geographically balances out, and shows where the Kroger locations are. I assume that perhaps you get some of those same questions as well, as who in the world is Kroger?
Yeah, so Kroger is a grocer based in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's been around over 100 years, started by a gentleman named Barney Kroger. They've grown a fair amount over those 100 years, and they're the product of a bunch of different either new stores or acquisitions over that time. They did acquire Fred Meyer some 25 years ago in the Northwest. And while they've got a good amount of stores on the West Coast, most of their operations are in the Midwest and in the Southeast. But they are, an important supermarket grocer. They're the largest supermarket grocer. But as I showed you, they're not anywhere close to the largest grocer in the United States or the world. Walmart is number one in the world and this country. Costco is number two in the world and number two on the West Coast.
If you have questions, put them into the Q&A button on your screen. We got a couple of questions coming in that we'll get to. Scott, I think you can see those.
Actually, I can't.
Okay, I will read them. I will read them out loud here. But anyone who's listening, you can add a question or comment in the Q&A function on your screen. So the first question that we will throw out at you, Scott, is: arguments against the merger claim stores will close and create food deserts. Is there a risk of the same thing happening if the merger doesn't go through, due to not being able to compete with the big box stores?
Yes. So the answer to your question is yes, but let's go to the beginning of it. I understand the concern about food deserts. You might remember when I was talking about Kroger's commitments and the 10 billion meals that they're going to donate over the next 6 years after the transaction closes. So I sit on the board of a nonprofit that was literally founded to combat the food desert problem in the United States. So it is very, very important to me. That commitment is extraordinary and wonderful. But that said, literally the first thing that Kroger said about this merger when it was announced, and I can't count the times they've said it publicly since, is that there will not be any store closures. There will not be any frontline job losses as a result of this merger. And C&S has echoed the same. Now, conversely, you're absolutely right. The reason that food deserts are so near and dear to me is because I'm very familiar with the consequences of what happens when supermarket grocery stores have to close because they can't compete with Walmart, Target, Costco, Aldi, and particularly Dollar General as they continue to grow. And look, the only way that supermarket grocers really have a chance of not replicating what we've seen with department stores, even more than they already had, because there have been dozens and dozens of supermarket grocery bankruptcies, is to get big enough to make the math work. When your costs are increasing the way that they have been, and you have Walmart and Costco and Aldi driving prices down as they do, the only way you can keep customers is to lower your prices also. And that's why prices have come down a fair amount over the years. But it's just basic economics, right? If your prices end up getting lower than your costs, you can't stay in business and stores have to close. And the consequences of that are dire. It's not just the risk of food deserts, but it's also the risk to employees and communities generally. I often say, and I've written this countless times, Supermarket grocers are pillars of thousands of American communities, and they have been so for generations. And so making sure that we keep them in business, we give them the ability to continue to fight back against Walmart, Costco, Amazon, and Aldi. You know, that's what this is about.
Yeah. Scott, as you know, I've written a couple of columns on this particular issue, and I think that's the one thing that people don't necessarily think about until we point it out to them, is that look, it's not about the local grocery store competing against the local grocery store. It's about basically Albertsons and Kroger and these other local grocery stores competing against the big guys. And by the big guys, we're talking Amazon and Walmart and Costco. And it's unbelievable to me that the FTC would come in and say basically that you use the 1980s model of what a grocery store is to try to stop this.
Well, I agree with you. That's all we're really trying to do is educate folks. And I think you might have mentioned, but Chris, I've been giving presentations like this, writing things about this for years, many, many years before this transaction. I suspect that's why Albertsons asked me to do more of it now, because they know that I've been speaking about this risk for years. Now, I personally suffered the consequences of the decline of department stores. And just impacted my family in a severe way. So it is personal to make sure it doesn't happen to supermarkets, especially given how important they have proven those stores to be in our communities as things have been so rough, especially during crises.
Yeah, I saw one person in a column say that basically this is the last best chance, last best hope for Albertsons and Kroger's and the others to be able to compete. Let's get to more of these questions here. Again, if you have a question, put them into the Q&A box on your screen. Should lower courts not allow the merger to go forward? Do you think this case will ultimately be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court? And that is a question that just came through.
So I can't speak for the lawyers or the companies who ultimately will make that decision. Do I think it is possible? Absolutely. Do I think to the extent that that were necessary, that would be important? Absolutely. But that's not a decision for me to make.
Next question, how do grocery stores affect local farmer markets and vice versa?
So, look, one of the great distinguishing characteristics of great supermarket grocers is their ability to engage with and buy from local farmers and other suppliers. In my view, it is one of the key key ways that they can survive, because the national guys, Walmart, Target, Amazon, Costco, they buy from national behemoths, right? They're not local. So it is an important part of the business model of supermarket grocers, number one. Number two, Kroger has specifically added that they want to increase their local purchases by 10% in the wake of the closing of this transaction, because they recognize just how important that is. And incidentally, they also are focused on expanding, not just broadly across local buyers, but also enhancing the diversity of the owners of those companies as well.
Another question here, and again, Scott is not speaking on behalf of the company, Albertsons or Kroger. He's merely here to answer questions as part of the analysis as well. But Scott, one question that one of our attendees had, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, is with the merger, do you think the brands will consolidate into one new brand, or would they retain all of their own brands?
I think it's the latter. So one thing that we've seen in sort of supermarket grocery merger history is, with few exceptions, changing folks' store banners is a mistake. Customers get confused, and the loyalty that in many cases is generations long gets lost. And so that is one of the reasons why, number one, I don't think that's going to happen here. And I think the banners are going to remain. But most important, as it relates to the divestiture stores that C&S is buying, that is why they are buying or licensing the banners of the stores that they are acquiring, so that they can continue to operate those stores and there won't be a disruption to customer loyalty and continuity. Those stores will remain strong, they'll remain good competitors, and they'll enable those markets to remain very competitive. And that is a sharp distinction from some prior divestiture transactions that have been spoken of and written about a fair amount, where the banner was changed and customers were confused and it was a problem. So, this is a meaningful improvement on that.
Scott, it's been remarkable to me how many um, folks in the media specifically, when the word divestiture comes up, they immediately jump to, oh, well, your store's going to close. And I saw that so many times over the past probably 30 to 60 days as the new CNS news came out. And I wrote an op-ed basically trying to point out that, look, divestiture does not mean closure of the store. And yet the headlines that you continue to see is, oh, we're going to lose our Fred Meyer, or we're going to lose our Albertsons, or whatever store it might be. So can you speak to a little bit about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, many people just don't understand the term. A divestiture is just a sale from one party to another. It is not a closing. To the contrary, if you're the buyer of those stores, it tends to be a really, really great thing because you're able to buy a whole bunch of stores and expand your business. And that's why CNS, from what I've read, is so excited about this transaction for them, because it enables them to grow their retail store base significantly. But remember, CNS supplies over 7,500 stores around the country. So adding another nearly 600 stores adds to their supply business a lot, and they'll enable them to buy more stuff at a better price that they can then filter through those better prices to those, what will be now more than 8,000 stores that they serve, including these. And that'll yield better prices for consumers in those stores also, which will strengthen those stores even more, which will then have those stores buying even more, which will strengthen their supply business even more. And you see how that sort of productivity wheel turns. It is a spectacular thing for CNS to be able to acquire these stores, enhance their retail, and in turn enhance their supply business and the symbiotic relationship between the two.
Back to questions here. I've seen some of the local unions support the merger, while I've also seen some of the national unions oppose. Why is there a disconnect?
So, look, I can't speak to the why unions do what they do, but let's remember.
You'd be a very rich man if you knew the answer to that question.
Well, true, but I think some of it is sort of intuitive. It's a negotiation entity, right? So they are always negotiating, always trying to find a way to get better benefits and wages for their members, which is great, and I respect that. Um, and I'm sure that there are negotiations with all the local unions, and the national wants to support them, but the national has actually been fairly silent on the transaction, in particular, somewhat silent and somewhat neutral as it relates to in particular, the larger CNS divestiture transaction that was announced a few months ago. So, look, I respect the importance of unions and what they've done to help workers, and you heard me say how important and indispensable our grocery teammates are around the country. However, let's remember again that every dollar that you raise costs in a store, you necessarily are raising prices, because supermarkets are outgunned by a lot vis-a-vis the national discount grocers. And they simply can't afford to continue to have costs rise and rise and rise without rising prices. And given the inflationary dynamics that we've seen from COVID and ecological shortages, from Ukraine, and from the food manufacturers jacking up prices with shrinkflation on all of us, the supermarket grocers have really been in a box. And so it is just so important for them to have the flexibility to continue to operate well. And at times, what the unions are doing can be pretty destructive to these stores' ability to serve our communities in the long run.
Scott, not everyone will be watching this live. Some will be watching it on a delayed basis. What's the timeline here on all of this? What should we be looking for? Important dates on the calendar.
Sure. Well, the FTC trial is in Oregon starting in just a couple of weeks. There are then trials scheduled in Colorado and in Washington after that. How long it will take for decisions, I don't know. And so that is up to the judges. Um, but I suspect that as the trials proceed, we'll get more insight as to what the expected timeline ought to be.
And in the different states, obviously in Washington, Attorney General Ferguson is really coming out in opposition to this and trying to slow it down. In other states, it's different characters as well. But in terms of the states that we're speaking to today, the Washington, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, what are the different things that can happen in each of these states, if anything, that people should be watching out for?
Well, first, as it relates to Washington, I'd point out that the Attorney General is conveniently running for governor. And this is presumably a helpful point to run on, to vilify a couple of companies that, even though they're just trying to lower prices and stay in business in the long run, um, for better or worse, it seems to make for good politics to vilify them, and blame them for things that aren't their fault, like food inflation, which, for the reasons I pointed out a moment ago, were caused by totally exogenous factors, not supermarkets, like COVID and Ukraine and ecological shortages and the food manufacturers, which they never mention when they talk about food inflation, even though those are the real causes. But as it relates to what people sort of can do, or can expect, look, I think it's important to let your various elected representatives and others know the facts. I mean, this exercise today is just one in a series of our attempt just to give people mathematic reality, right? And the fact that I'm saying them as someone who's been engaged by Albertsons doesn't make any of these mathematical facts any less true. 2 + 2 = 4, no matter who says it. And this math is incontrovertible. And so I would just encourage people to, make, these folks aware of the facts, because a lot of what we read, a lot of what gets said, a lot of what's even in briefs, and the FTC's pretrial brief is rife with things that are just wrong about our industry. And they literally mention Walmart once in this industry, and they distinguish Costco and Sprouts and Aldi and Trader Joe's and Amazon, everyone except supermarkets, as if supermarkets, live in some fantasy 1980s island, which is obviously just not the case.
Scott Moses of Solomon Partners, thank you very much for your analysis today. We really, really appreciate it. Hopefully, it gives folks who are listening live and those who will watch on a delayed basis a better understanding of this particular issue. So we want to thank you very much for being here.